could do as well. But what I'm going to do is a cover version of one of these tutorial videos. We'll see how long it takes, but I'm going to freely admit that in the past, I sent students off to do this without ever doing it myself. And so now I'd like to be able to answer some questions. The biggest question that comes up, we're not going to cover today. It's going to be on Wednesday, and that is this, basically how do you get the output of Blender like into your C program, right? And on this, the Flocker assignment, you know how you could get loads OBJs. There's a cube, there's Suzanne, and there's banana. And so the idea of this, of your Blender wanderings, is make an object, lowercase object, save it as an OBJ, load it into your program, okay? But you have to save it a certain way for the program to like it, because the load OBJ function that's in the OpenGL tutorials is pretty simplified, and it tends to like break on a lot of different OBJs. If you just like go around the net and like search for OBJs, a lot of them won't load correctly. So you just need to make sure that you save it in Blender a certain way. Okay, so here we are in Blender, and we have our A camera with its little representation of the frustum, you know. Although it's not the frustum, because the frustum is supposed to be the viewing volume, and this is not the volume. This is just showing you that it's a perspective camera with that little, can people see what I'm talking about here? It's not too bright. Okay. So you can see the black arrow there. That's the up vector of the camera, right? And here's a light over here. Those things are not relevant to what we're doing, because those are for like when you want to render the model that you've made. You know, like you want to have your camera over here, you want to have these lights on the scene. We're not doing that. We're just making a model that we're going to export as an OBJ, and it's not going to have any lighting attached to it. So over here on the right-hand side, there's like scene things, and you can basically just like click on the eyeballs and make the light and the camera kind of disappear. So just a little bit of navigation. I said that you always start in Blender with this cube that nobody seems to want, but it's there. It is an object, and there it is in the scene description, cube, right? We'll get rid of it in a second. I'm navigating around just doing like middle button dragging to like, and then I can use a scroll wheel to go in and out. There's also this representation of, you can see that the axes are moving as I move, and it's sort of like world coordinates over there. And so you can grab those and you can move those around, and those will change your view as well. Okay. You can also, instead of using the scroll wheel, you can just click and drag on the magnifying glass and make things change in size. And I'm sure there's a shortcut with the mouse. I don't know it, but to translate things around with the hand, you click and drag, and then it will change like where stuff is. So if you're ever like zoomed in on the wrong place, then you can just use that to get to where you want to be. Okay, so I have a couple of notes here. Again, for those of you who walked in late, this is my cover version of a YouTube tutorial, which is linked in the course page today. So if you go and watch that, it's a 30-minute video. And isn't that great? I'm going to try and stretch that into 50 minutes. No, we'll end when we end, right? But if you go and watch it, it's the same stuff. I'm leaving out things that he does some detours. Was like, you can do this, and then let's undo that, and it doesn't really show up in the final model. So I'm not going to do some of those things. He also has a very nice German accent, so you can enjoy that as well. It's part of a series called, like Blender for Noobs, basically. It's based on Blender 2.8. We're at Blender 3.5 right now. I don't see any major differences. Maybe there's some bug fixes. He mentioned some kind of bug that I've never encountered. But today is about just making the 3D model. And Wednesday, I'm going to talk about the texturing issues, like how do we make this look like whatever we're going to make it look like in terms of color and texture. But it's situated in a larger series that you can take a look at. I'm going to talk about this one where he makes an apple. And there's like the next video, before it gets to texturing, the next video is making a knife. This is organic, right? It's like a piece of fruit. A knife is a human created object. In that video as well, he's using an image for reference. And I don't know how to do that. I'm not going to attempt to explain that, but it's sort of like you insert, your picture of a knife into Blender, and then you kind of like trace it and extrude it and like make it a 3D thing. And you are just totally copying what's in the photograph. And then you can just chuck the photograph away, okay? Here, it's a bit more freeform, okay? So as I said, this is not just for this homework. Like I've had students who for homework 5, where you're supposed to make a game, just go crazy on creating objects for their game. Like I think I said, there was a student who had a fruit catching game where you move a basket around and you catch. So like make an apple, that's the first fruit, like of course you can take the banana OBJ, but like you need cherries and pears and various things and have fun with it. Okay, so I have some notes here on my phone. I'm gonna try to follow along with those. So anyway, we have an object here. It's in the scene. There's a little tab thing you can bring up on the side that says things about the object. One thing that the video starts off with is the scale. Notice that this cube is 2 by 2 by 2. It's like the canonical building volume, but it's meters. So it's like we're literally like modeling a gigantic box right now. And if we're going to do like a fruit, for example, that's wrong. Okay, it's the wrong size. And so we're gonna want to be smaller dimensions. But there's also this issue of the so-called scene properties. So over here on the right, there's a lot of stuff. I don't know what most of it is, but I know that this is the way to get the scene properties and units. And basically this grid that we're seeing here is, I believe it's like a 1 by 1 meter grid. And it's in units of meters. So if we're working on a smaller object, in the tutorial video, this guy recommends making everything smaller. And now you'll see that your dimensions are in centimeters instead of meters. I'm going to get rid of this object, actually. So it's highlighted with yellow or orange, whatever. I click away, I click on it, and I hit X, and that's for delete. It asks me to confirm it's gone. Okay, so that object is gone, and now I'm going to add an object. And there's a lot of different things. Mesh is what we've been talking about in this class, a whole bunch of vertices, right? And there's a cube. There it is again. We can get the cube back by putting it in. We don't really want that. We're going to model some fruit today, and so we want something that is close to our fruit shape, and that's going to be a sphere, a UV sphere. The UV is texture coordinates, so it's kind of like pre-set up to do texturing. We won't be needing that today, but we'll start with that. And so we get a sphere here, and notice that it is not, analytic sphere. It's sort of like in multi-earth. It's got a certain number of facets to it. One thing, it's not the right size. Okay, we look over here. It's like 200 by 200. It's like a huge, gigantic ball kind of thing. There's different ways we could change the size of this, but one thing, I don't know why it's so temporary, but like down here when you make when you do a command, there's like a little pop-up window there that like allows you to see the command and to modify it. If we click on this, we just added a UV sphere, and there's some modifiers or parameters in here. The segments and rings are basically like the lines of latitude, lines of longitude, like how faceted is this thing going to be. We don't need to have full, that much resolution on this. So we can go down a bit, but radius 100 meters, centimeters. We don't need that. We'll go down to something smaller, more apple-sized 4. Okay, so I'll just zoom in on it. Okay, so there's a little object, and we can, I didn't do the transformation. I've just been moving around the camera, but we can move the object that we have selected. Over here on the left are some transformation tools: move, that's translate, rotate, and scale. So if we click any of them, we get an informative little set of axes that we can click and drag to actually have it go where we want it to be. We don't actually need to go anywhere. Control Z is undo, so I'll just put it back where it was. Scale, I can grab one of these axes and scale, and it's along the axis. So this is essentially like multiplying by the scale matrix that we talked about, right? S sub x, S sub y, S sub z object. I don't need to do that. I can also rotate it, and it's not really that interesting. You can rotate a sphere, but indeed we can rotate the sphere. One thing to know about is these axes that pop up. Let me actually rotate this a little bit so you can see this issue. If I rotate it like that, and I scale it, like that. Let's rotate it this way. Okay, so I look at it and I've got this diagonal thing. I said that the guy does detours and then they don't wind up in the final object. That's exactly what I'm doing right now, but I'm just trying to explain a feature. If I had this thing at an angle and I wanted to scale it, again, notice that the axes for scaling are not rotating with the object, okay? These are world coordinate axes. They're not model coordinates, okay? So if we want to make that thing like get taller in the flattened direction, we have an option up here to change our coordinate system from global, say, to local. And now you see that that axis is aligned with what we think of as the up down of the object. Okay, so that's something to be aware of, is that you have this menu up here for changing like what coordinate system all of these transforms are relative to. I'm going to undo everything that I've done here. Back to normal. So, and we'll get through this in 30 minutes. Here we are in what's called object mode. If you look up here in the upper left corner, object mode is, where we're putting in objects, deleting objects, moving the whole object, transforming the whole object. Now we get down into, let's change the details of the object. So we have this other mode called selected. I don't think I have to. I'm just going to select it. Called edit mode. And when I go into edit mode, it changes the display a bit. It highlights all of the vertices in the mesh that we see them in object mode, but now they're highlighted. They're looking very like choosable and modifiable right now, right? And they're all selected. That's what this means. Less. So I can click away, and now they're not orange. They're not selected. So here in edit mode, we can pick things. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here, but like if I'm in object mode, edit mode, and I want to pick the whole object, you'd think, okay, select box, like do that. Okay, and you're like, oh, I got it. And if I'm correct, if I rotate around here, you'll see that you actually only got all the ones that are visible. Okay, so it does not choose like through to the other side. It's really like screen space as opposed to 3D, the selection that you're doing there. So that's not what we would do to get all of it. I believe if I go back to object mode, and by the way, there's this menu, and then there's also tab is the way to toggle back and forth between object and edit mode. If I go to object mode and then back to edit mode, I've lost them. That's nice. That didn't work. But I do know that if I hover over it and I hit L, then it will select everything. I'm not sure how, I don't know what L stands for. I'm not sure how it's working, but it sort of does like everything that you're touching and what it's connected to, it'll all get associated and it gets selected. So it's sort of like an automatic select all for whatever object you're hovering over. But if we don't want to do it that way, we can do it on the level of, what do we know about? Vertices, edges, and primitives, aka polygons or faces, as they're called here. Up here is the vertex, edge, and face select mode. So right now it's in vertex mode, meaning that if I click on something, it's going to select like the nearest vertex. Okay. And if I go to edge mode, then I am selecting edges. And if I go to face mode, I get faces. Okay. Now, the usual convention of if you shift click, then it will add to what you have, right? So I've selected one face, I shift click here, shift click there, there. And now I have this collection, which will be what gets operated on if I should apply some transform, for example. So let's just take, for example, pick a vertex. And now we still have access to these transformations, but instead of being on the whole object, they're on that particular thing that's selected. So if I take move, again, the set of axes pops up. I'm in global mode. That's not really convenient because most likely I would want to move like kind of relative to the object itself. If I look at local, what's that giving me? That's also in the local coordinate system. So there's another coordinate system which is quite useful for surface type stuff. That's normal. And so that's like all the stuff we did with lighting. Like the local coordinate system is like on that patch of surface, whatever you've selected, right? So we'll zoom in on that and see that the blue vector is our normal to the surface of that one. So if we grab it and we're in move mode, we move, it's like displacement mapping, right? Poor man's displacement mapping. Well, it's poor because it's one at a time. But we're moving that vertex in the normal direction. We can, well, scaling and rotation don't really mean anything for individual vertex. Let's take a, by the way, we can switch between these selection modes with hitting the numbers 1, 2, and 3. So I don't have to be up there. 3 will get me face. I choose a face. I do feel a little disturbed by having that vertex displaced. I'm going to fix it by undoing it. There we go. All right. Okay, so I pick it. I'm in normal mode. I move by grabbing this thing, and it will pull all the stuff that's local to it. And yes, we can also do weird things like rotating, and we can scale it. So this is a tool choice that I don't 100% understand. I mean, it doesn't always work the way I think it's going to work. So when you make the selection, you've got these colored arrows, and it's clear enough. You know, if you grab them, then they're gonna change something along an axis. So if I'm doing scaling on a face, like what am I scaling exactly? I don't know what it would mean to scale a planar thing in the Z direction, you know, in the normal direction, but I believe that if I grab this red thing and drag it, then I'm going to do vertical scaling. Let's see if that, yeah. So I'm only changing in that direction. If I grab green, I'm changing in the horizontal direction. But suppose you want to do uniform scaling, like there's no axis for that. And I think it is sort of like grabbing it, this circle is telling you something about, like, it's letting you do like the uniform scaling. But like, if you go in a certain direction, like what does that mean? Not 100% sure always. Okay. So there's another little option here, which is when we're doing these operations, for example, movement, you see that it's only the things that are like the immediate neighbors. So there's another kind of transformation, like another kind of rule for like what happens to the neighbors of the thing that you selected, and that is proportional editing. So if you click on this thing, you really need a tutorial to like tell you, like, because there's 8,000 options. How would I know that it's this weird little icon over here that has this effect? So if you turn that on and then you start to move stuff, you can affect more than just your neighbors. And this is selectable, kind of the like radius of you know, the range of effect. And that is indicated by the circle, which is like a super huge circle that's almost outside of the screen. I'm making it smaller now with the scroll wheel. This almost breaks my fingers to like try and drag with the left mouse button and scroll the middle when I'm doing it. So if I bring this down to like that radius, I can change artistically like what portion of the object is getting affected here. Okay, so I can bring it all the way down. Oops, I screwed it up. Bring it all the way down. It would just be the same as like not proportional. Okay. So that too large. There we go. All right. There are some edits, some basic edits. Right. Another way to select objects besides, you know, doing your click on a line or shift click is if you do an alt click, then you get like the loop. So it like takes the whole thing there all the way around. I don't know what the rules are for general objects. I mean, that's what happens on a sphere, but we have a quadrilateral mesh. So basically we always have sort of like a horizontal direction and a vertical direction. And it'll like go as far as it can. For example, if I do that on the vertical, does it go all the way around? Yeah, because of the way it's parameterized, it only goes pole to pole. It doesn't do a full great circle in the polar direction. I suppose that you could probably like put those two things together if you did an alt shift click. Well, let's just actually try it. If I do alt shift click, I am doing the same thing on the other side and adding it to what I had, and now I have a full circle in that direction, right? And so if I've selected that, I'm actually worried what will happen if I do it this way. So I'm just going to stick with the horizon. I'm not horizon, the equator. If I have the equator here, and then I can do modifiers or transforms, like let's So I'm doing all those selected things, right? And I'm not just doing in the X direction, Y direction, or Z direction. I've chosen the circle so that it's kind of more uniform, okay? So I actually didn't want that, but if I like go up here and I select this one, and we've got proportional. So remember, proportional means that the ones nearby are also getting affected. I take that and I start to move it. Right, I'm pinching it in. And I can go over here and do the same thing and pinch it in. One more. All right. And I can also, I'm going for pair here. All right. So we want to look, wider at the bottom, a little taper at the top. I want to what do I want to do? I want to stretch it upwards. Okay. So I want to grab the top. I'm going to do that with just the vertex here. Why don't we do bold? We'll try the next thing, which is the next ring from the vertex. And I put it in move, and I want to pull it up. And I'm still in proportional. So if I don't have proportional, it does, that ring only, plus the ones that are next to it. But if I do have proportional, then it seems a bit more natural. And if I widen this out a bit, it's smoother, like what we're getting is smoother. Okay? And I'm just going to I'm going to go to vertex selection, select that, oopsies, select that, and we're still in proportional. I'm going to drag that up. All right, decently pair-like, right? So part of the video, which I won't do here, is to make it look more realistic, it shouldn't be perfectly circularly symmetric. You should, grab certain parts of it and just make it lumpy. Take things and kind of make indentation, whatever. That's art. That's not computer science, and I'm not good at that. So we'll just leave that up. But if it looks misshapen, then maybe that's a little more realistic. So the thing I want to point out here is we're modeling this. We're not really worrying about lighting. We're not really worrying about the detail right now, but we can have an effect on that. So if I select this thing and do right click, you see I have this shade smooth option. If I click on that, voila, it does the stuff we were talking about many weeks ago with Gros shading and having the normals get averaged across adjacent faces, so that we don't see those edges in between the facets. Okay, so we can, as I keep saying in this class, you look at the silhouette, you see the actual geometric complexity. We can still see that this is kind of low poly, right? The fact that we can see these edges here, right? But in the interior, it actually looks semi-smooth. We go back to flat shading, and each of the facets gets one color, right? It's being lit with a light source, but one color. So and this is an important connection, since we were talking about splines and surface subdivision last week. I want to show you that it exists in the world of software such as Blender, not just in lectures that I give. So we're good with this kind of low poly modeling that we're doing to get the gross shape, because we know that we can do smooth shading to make it look a little better. But we can also use surface subdivision to make the actual geometry become much more detailed. Okay, so we have the object selected here, and if we go over to this particular item called modifier properties, add a modifier, and just look how many modifiers there are. Oh, look, generate subdivision surface. Okay, so we're basically saying on this object that I have selected, I would like to perform surface subdivision, such as we described last week. And look, the same phrase, capital Clark, exists in this software. Isn't that nice? So it is an industry standard thing to do. And I believe by selecting it, it already did something there, just to verify that we have some effect on this object. As I showed you kind of quickly at the end of the lecture last week, like what were the examples? There was one that was like 4 cubes that became like a T shape. It was like a T shape of cubes, and it got progressively more rounded off, more like smooth and curvy as you went through, as you applied the subdivision, as you iterated, right, or recursed. Same thing with the car, the VW Bug, that started kind of chunky, and then it became smoother and smoother. So that's what is going on here with this levels thing. 1 means it's been performed 1 time. Can I go to 0? Right. That's the basic. We subdivide, and if you just kind of keep your eye on like 1 quadrilateral here, 1 subdivision means that it becomes 4. And so every single rectangle that you see will get turned into 4. And so 1 becomes 4, becomes 16 when I do 2 levels. Viewport means it's happening here. And then render is like when we do our offline, you know, make it look really nice. So it would be typical to have the second number be higher because it takes a certain amount of time. And so for real-time interaction, as we're, you know, looking at our object from all sides, we probably don't want this number to get too crazy. But you keep going and notice that the silhouette is smooth now because we really are amping up the number of vertices here. Not just doing trickery in the interior. Okay, so go back to edit mode. And here is a nice illustration of, like, take a look over here. This wireframe are the vertices that we started with. Now, based on the language that I introduced last week, we can call these the control points, right? The control mesh. And the underlying surface that we're rendering here, this, you know, the gray shaded stuff, that's what we're getting from the surface subdivision, right? This is all, you know, this is the 3D equivalent of when I drew 3 points, which would just be this, oops, I missed, which would just be this, but doing the Bezier curve, we get the curve. That's what we're seeing here in 3D, right? That's our control mesh, and this is the underlying surface that our particular spline algorithm, which in this case is capital Clark, is defining. Okay. Are there any questions so far on any of this stuff? Okay. So, we're going to stick to flat shading actually, because when we do smooth shading, like we totally lose all the vertices. We don't even know what the vertices are. Stick to flat shading. Okay, so one other little thing I want to show here. This is organic object modeling. Okay, it looks kind of pear-like. What else does a pear have? You know, besides the texture stuff that we're going to get to on Wednesday. Stem, right? So that's like another object. Okay. I mean, I guess if you're a wizard, you could like probably do some things here where you like start to like extrude something out of the top, but it's just simpler to, by the way, this is a situation where I'm like, I want to be looking at the top, but I'm centered here. Let me move everything down a little bit. I'm gonna start with cylinder, right? A vertical cylinder, and I'm gonna do some stuff with it. So one thing to know about here is like when I go to add an object, where does that object get spawned, if you will? It gets spawned at this 3D cursor, this complicated looking crosshairs down here. So if I add a cylinder right now, it'll like be in the belly of the pear, and I want it to be up here. Okay. Now, of course, I could like move the pear down so that the top is there, but basically, this allows us to change the 3D cursor location. Okay. And it's not just a 2D like, oh, I'm here on the screen. If I click, I'm actually going to move it here. If I click right there on the top, and then I start to move around, it stays with it, right? It's on that, it's stuck to that part of the object now. And so if I add a cylinder, for example, oh dear, the default cylinder is actually a bucket, a barrel that I'm inside, right? Like, it's bigger than I need it to be. But we have this over here as our option. So we see, like, I believe depth means height. So this is a 2 meters high and a 1 meter radius barrel, and we'll make it much smaller. Okay, so we only need it to be like 1. And we'll make the height of it, let's have it be 1 centimeter. And then this is like the slices and rings on the sphere, like how much detail do we need on our cylinder? Just do something simple like that. Okay, so we zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, and there we have a cylinder that is approximately stem sized and stem placed, and you see that the model coordinates are the origin of the model coordinates for the cylinder are in the center of the cylinder, not at one end or the other, so that half of it is sticking up and half of it is like buried inside of the pear. And you can kind of see that down there. So there's this other option, another random button you can press, called X-ray mode, which like makes things more transparent so that you can see inside. So if you're curious about when things are overlapping, it can help your selected object kind of come out, if you will, for you to see it. So if we go, well, let's just move it. Like we've got the whole thing selected, and we can like kind of, we can have it floating in space. We can see that little line there, which is like where it crosses into the pear body. But anyway, you can turn off the X-ray mode. I don't think we really need it for what we're about to do. But there we see this stem, and of course, what it looks like is somebody jammed a pencil in the top of a pear, right? So we want this to look like curvy and so forth. So I'm just going to show you a couple things that you can do with this. Number one, let's say I don't like the length of it. Like I want it to be longer. So we're going to try and do an extrude operation. So if I go into edit mode and I'm choosing faces, I click away and I click so that I'm like, I've got the top cap of the cylinder selected. And now we have a variety of things over here. One of them is called extrude region. And this works. I grab it, I pull it up, and I'm not translating, I'm not scaling, I'm like extending this thing in a certain direction. So I just made it a little bit longer. Okay. What else might I want to do? I might want to make it curvy. So I've got the top selected right now. Let's just like put a bend in it. All right. Let's just like, so I'm still in proportional mode, right? And so the problem is that as I move the top, it's got some rules for how it's moving everything else. Let's bring that in a little bit. And now you see that it's kind of moving the other stuff, but not so badly. And now I've got this bend, but of course now it looks like, a child just broke their straw. Like it's not curved at all. So the basic problem is that when I extruded, I had a cylinder which was, not supposed to be bent. When I extruded, I kind of like stacked two cylinders on top of each other. And then we've got this kink in the middle. Now, if you want to have a curve that's more gentle or gradual, then you basically need to have more kinks, more rings along the vertical shaft of it. So the way to do that, I believe, is through this thing called loop cut. So if we, I think I have to do mine. Let's just get it centered a bit. So, all right. So if I'm in line mode, and I think I loop cut, right. So there's a basic question with loop cut. It's supposed to insert some more geometry. There's a basic question of like, which geometry do you want inserted? And the way that this guy explained it was that if you choose a vertical line, you'll get a horizontal thing. And if you choose a horizontal line, you'll get a vertical thing. So, which way do you want more geometry? Do you want more geometry this way, which, I can put more stripes in? Or do we want more rings going vertically, right? So I choose a stripe. I will choose a stripe. And I will get another ring. And I can do it again, right? So I've basically added some more detail there. Of course, nothing has changed in terms of how it's moving. So how do I actually get that to change? Okay. All right, so there's a lot of different rings here. And now the hope is that if I am going to select, let's get out of this. If I am going to select one of these, like let's say I grab the tip, right? So I've gotten like that loop of lines around the top, and I want to start moving it. It's doing some hard to guess things because of this proportional law. But basically, there's some kind of curviness happening. I'm going to choose to be happy with what I'm getting. But basically, at every one of those rings, there's some kind of change. And then let's sort of organic, right? Okay. Now I've still got these selected. Let's say I want this to be like tapering. So I want to scale it. I will grab, and you see that it's scaling the rest of the stem as well because of the proportional control. And I can make more or less of it get scaled. But I'm pretty happy with like all of the things there, just to get a little taper. Okay. So I've got the taper going now. That's looking okay. What else might I want to do? Oh yes, how do we shade this, right? So it's flat shaded. If I click on it in object mode and choose smooth, then okay, that looks reasonable. But right now, actually, to me, that looks unnervingly like somebody's arm with the hand cut off. Like there's like an elbow and stuff. Like there should not be an elbow in a stem, right? It should be all kind of curvy. So let's do subdivision. Okay, so I'm going to go back to flat shading. Edit mode. Let's go in edit mode. I hover over it, hit L. I've selected all of it. I go back here to add modifier, and I do subdivision surface. Okay, and let's do 2 levels. Great. Click away. Go back to object mode. It's looking kind of, still looks like an arm a little bit, but like at least there's not a sharp elbow. It's a little bit more curvy. But one of the things that the subdivision surface does is we had a nice like flat cap on the end of the cylinder, and it's kind of turned that into rounded, right? It's like more like a rounded thing. And it's done it at both ends. I won't, go diving into under there, but it's the same thing, which makes it a little weird. It might make it a little weird because it starts to like taper back, comes back at the bottom, and it kind of looks like a big cucumber or something. So one other thing we can do, if we want to have this be sharper on top, in edit mode, if we select one of these rings and we want to move it. If I select the ring and I start to, let's go back to local instead of normal. And I start to move it like this. Oh, I'm still in that. I screw like this, right? I just get this moving around, okay? So one thing that we can do, I believe the shortcut for this is G. And I don't know how to do this other than the keyboard way, but if you do GG, then you can move it up and down. And that's going to affect how the subdivision comes out. And the closer you get to the top, the more you're going to remove that that roundedness, right? So now it's still kind of, so it's not sharp, but it looks like it's kind of been cut off there, and that's desirable. Some other, two more things. My goodness, the time here is well nigh perfect. Two more things. We can go to edit mode again. We do L. We have the option of doing kind of a global change to this. It's called shrink back. So we can, oops. If we back up and we decide, it doesn't look like it's the right scale, we can do this kind of thing to it. It's a little bit unpredictable what's happening because of where the rings are if we go too far. I'll just leave it as it is. That's one option. And then the last thing I want to say is, we have two separate objects here, okay? If I want to join them, then I can shift click, they're both selected, and I do a right click, and then there's a join option. And now they're one object. Okay, so all the subsequent things that I do will be to this one object. I guess one last thing to say is, if you've gotten this far, I don't mean you here in terms of listening to me, but in terms of modeling, you're going to want to save it, right? So these things get saved as blend files. So you give it some name, here 2, and there it is. I was just thinking about, so suppose you want to make a scene, and I think in the tutorial video, he's got like a tabletop that has multiple fruits. You can select it, copy, paste, and then move the thing you've selected. Now you have 2 of them, and of course you can change that so that you've got some variation. So this is getting into the, you want to have a flock of pears or something. Okay. All right, so that's it for today. And if you look at this video, you'll notice I said a lot of the same things. But so there's 2 videos for Wednesday, which are about how do we associate a texture map with sort of texture coordinates with this model, and then how do we, put some colors to that texture map and get ourselves a pear-colored or apple-colored object using Blender. So if you should start to watch one of those videos and find that that's perfectly fine for you, then feel free to not come on Wednesday, except for the fact that I will explain the homework. So the details of the homework will be put out there. Otherwise, I will see you next time. Thank you.